So I'm working with the Office of Entrepreneurship and Career Development, which is basically the mission is to bring students events and programming that will provide us with a lot more knowledge about how to navigate as innovative and creative musicians in the 21st century. And I feel like Josh Wright just really embodies that mission with all that he's done to create a career for himself in the online space and also as a performer and a teacher, just being really creative with all that he's doing. So we're really excited to partner with the MTNA Collegiate Chapter IU to bring you this event. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Rachel, who will introduce Josh a little bit more.
Yeah, so we're very excited to have you here with us. We'll kind of break up this session in two parts. So in the first part, we'll ask more of your background in your whole career and where you are now. And then the second part is more questions targeting with online teaching and how to how to get the equipments that you have and any advice that you can give us. So let's start with, I guess the first question is, can you tell us about your early musical background and early training and um, your your music career?
Sure. I started when I was 5. I took a few lessons with my mom, who taught piano, and then she was more of like a earlier teacher, beginner teacher to intermediate level. And then I went to my grandma for 4 or 5 years, who was also, kind of went up to the early advanced stage, and then I switched to Susan Dwellmeyer's instruction. She was at the University of Utah, and that was amazing. She just lives nearby. I'll still go play for her now, even after all my education's over. It's like I'm still learning from her, which is great. I did my undergrad and master's at the University of Utah with her. That's pretty much the only reason I went to the U is because of her, University of Utah. And then I did my doctorate at the University of Michigan with Logan Skelton. And now I'm back in Utah, where I teach at the University of Utah and do my online courses and YouTube channel, and then private teaching as well. So that's a little background of the education part.
So for your education part, you after your during your doctorate study at the University of Michigan, you also competed in the Chopin competition, and you were also doing other competitions as well, and starting, I guess, your YouTube channel. So what made you go into starting a channel and making videos, and now being a founder of Pro Practice? What was kind of your push to do that?
Yeah, I first started my channel just as a way to upload some performances and then also to save time in my private lessons, because I was noticing I was teaching a lot of the same, like, oh, here's what a long, short rhythm is for when you're practicing passage work. That'll help, get things a little more even in your scales. And so I was using it just as an efficiency tool. And at the end, I would say, um, if you have a question that you want me to cover, let me know. And then people from Europe started writing in some questions. I was like, oh, this is kind of cool and fun. And then, and I wasn't all that consistent with uploading in the first couple of years. I was just doing it more for fun. It's always kind of been for fun anyway, but I started to get more serious with it when one of my private students is like, I want to pay for a full lesson, like on one piece. He's like, because your YouTube channel is just like random. It's like, here's how to do trills, here's how to do a scale or arpeggio, and it gives like a lot of little tips on concepts, but I want you to take me through a piece, because like when we're doing these lessons, it would save me a lot of time if I had your guidance in like kind of a prepackaged way, that I could learn most of this stuff that you're probably going to tell me in a lesson anyway, so that when we get to our lesson, you can kind of hit the ground running and we can go over more in-depth concepts. So I was like, that's a good idea. So it was 2014. It was during my time at U of M. And I just over the breaks, I would film in my in-laws basement, And I just had this really crummy like tripod extension arm made out of PVC pipe, and to like go over the keys. And I just bought like two cheap like $200 Canon cameras, just like the little handheld ones, and that's what I filmed with for a lot of years. And I just taught myself how to edit videos into this. I'm glad I always did that, like into this configuration that you see here. I always was like, if I'm going to charge money, I better make it a little more premium than my YouTube stuff. So I always did that, even though it was a pain in the butt to like edit and overlay all the audio, and then I've got to crop all the angles and get it looking right. And I was slow at it. It took me a long time. And I just started charging a few dollars for each tutorial. They're pretty much all pro practice videos are between 20 to 60 minutes long. Some of them are a little longer, but over the years, the quality got better and I started to get more in a groove with it. I still try to always I keep all of my tutorials under $10 just in case people in third world countries just can't afford instruction. And then I sell the whole package of everything I've ever done as like a lifetime access option for several $100s if somebody wants, but there's over like 300 tutorials in there to date. So it's still coming out to like, $1 or $2 per tutorial. It's not like, I don't want this to, be prohibitively expensive. I want this to help as many people as possible. So that's how that got started. And then I have one other paid course, which is called the VIP Masterclass series, which was just a little side project. People were like, okay, this is awesome that you're doing these full-length tutorials with pro practice and you've got your little YouTube tips, but like I wrote to you 3 months ago and you still haven't answered my question. And I was like, I need like a forum where I'm posting every single week, but like I can't afford to just like take away from my private teaching because I still have to support my family. So I was like, I'll start a little masterclass series. People can pay like $25 a month if they want to be a part of it. And I'll post at least one video a week that goes in depth with a member's question. So it's like one-on-one instruction, but you can get in for a lot lower cost than what regular lessons would cost. So it's like 4 lessons a month. So comes out to be what, $6 a lesson or so. So that was kind of a fun project. And that still is a lot smaller than pro practice. I don't have nearly as many members in that, but the members in that have been in it for a long time. They're like, yeah, I wanted the extra instruction. So it's just kind of, all of this has kind of been born off of this organic process of people kind of telling you what they want and kind of seeing the need in the market. And sometimes I have to say no. Like people like, I want a pedal camera. I'm like, no, I'm not going to set up a camera on my pedal every single time I film a tutorial in case you need to see one little pedal change. I'll just explain it in the tutorial. Or I want you to do lessons on accompanying. And I'm like, I just don't have the time to do that. Like that does sound like a fun project. And I've done a ton of accompanying in my life, but I just don't have the time for that. So you do have to say no, but I've also let the market kind of guide where the channel goes. And I'll still, even now when people randomly write in to my email, they'll say, can you do a video on this? Even if they're not a member of Pro Practice or the VIP Masterclass series, I'll, consider that for a YouTube video. And then I'll post samples of all the paid videos on my YouTube channel as well, in case someone really is like hurting financially, so they can at least see some of the instruction in the paid materials. So I think that's a big thing. I think a lot of people are like, I have to be paid for every little tiny thing that I do. And I found that giving away like as much as you possibly can and then keeping some in reserve, to help support your family has actually been one of the best marketing tools I've learned along the way, because I always thought like, okay, I should give away 20% and then save 80% for the paid courses. And my friend who has like a multi-million-dollar like videography course that he sells, he's like, oh no, he's like, you got to do the opposite. You got to give away 80 and then you keep 20 for your paid course. I was like, how does that work? And he's like, well, when you change people's lives and keep adding so much value, they're happy to support you. And I was like, okay, I'll try it. And sure enough, like people really do see that you care and they want to support you in your endeavors and you want to support them in their endeavors. So it's kind of a nice exchange there. So that's been somewhat of a philosophy of mine. So.
I was curious about how you marketed your course at the beginning when you first envisioned it as something that you wanted to offer for sale. Was it like pretty organic through your YouTube channel, or you weren't actively marketing it, or were there specific strategies that you felt like really helped?
Yeah, it still is just organic for the most part. I've done maybe $100,000 worth of paid advertising over several years, which is like very little, like compared to most businesses. Um, and I go on and off with like my paid ads because I don't want to be that annoying guy that shows up every single time you turn on a YouTube channel, YouTube video. I'm there, and it can get really obnoxious. So I will go in seasons. Like I'll just say, okay, like I've advertised for like 3 to 6 months on YouTube. Let's take a little break, and let's go to Facebook and Instagram, and I'll do a little there. And then there's sometimes, and I've noticed that it doesn't, my paid marketing and advertising, it breaks even, and it might go to a 2 to 1 ROI, like return on investment, if it's doing well. And I've had months that have like a 4 or 5 to 1 ROI, and you're like, you feel on top of the world, and then the next month it's like negative. But overall, averaging, maybe a 2 to 1 ROI to break even. And I'm like, okay, but if I'm posting on YouTube every single week or 2 times a week, and then at the end of every video, I just say, if you want to go deeper than this channel offers, you can check out my paid courses. There's links in the description. It's just real casual. It's not like I'm doing a huge sales pitch at the end. And then people aren't idiots. If they want more, they're going to, do more. You got to let them know that you have it, but you don't need to like shove it down their throat either that, oh, you have to buy this. Like, here's a paid course. I'm just like pretty casual about it, and it seemed to work out the best organically versus paid advertising. So
You've mentioned that you started the channel when you were doing your doctorate, and now you also do a duo with your wife. Can you talk a little bit about um, going from doing performing and also teaching and also being having a YouTube channel, and like being able to balance all of that and still have concerts? Um, yeah.
yeah, I don't think that I've done anything particularly special with like my scheduling. There were lots of years like right after so I started the channel in 2009, which was way before my doctorate. And then I got serious about it I started pro practice, the paid stuff, during my, during my doctorate. But I would just do those over breaks and then kind of drip the content out over several weeks. So, and then I would just film in like Logan's office. Every once in a while I just do, and I still kind of film that way. I still kind of just, film in batches. Like last night I recorded 6 videos, and those will be dripped out over the next like 2 weeks, which is nice because like people look at my upload stuff and they're like, oh my gosh, like you're uploading to 2 paid courses and then you're uploading to YouTube, and how do you do it? Like that must be all day, every day. And I do it more in batches. The pro practice takes a long time. Like usually I'm pretty tired by the end of one tutorial of that, because that's usually an hour. I've got a lot more setup to do. I got to check a few extra things. But for like the masterclass series and YouTube, it's a little quicker. But I'll try to do things strategically. But I've always told my students that were like, how do you balance all this? I was just like, I'm really not very successful at doing 3 things at the same time. I'm good at 2 things. Like I can do performing and recording, but then my private teaching suffers. Or I can do private teaching and recording, but then my performing suffers. And it wasn't until really this year pretty much that I was like, okay, like where are my priorities? The courses have gotten so big that I'm like, that has a lot more impact than a private lesson. But I still love my private students a lot. Like I don't want to just give up on private teaching. I still get a lot of my ideas for my videos from my private students. I still find a lot of joy in doing that. I like doing it. I want to stay sharp with that skill of teaching like private students well. So I was like, okay, I'm going to just switch to half-hour lessons for all my students. And maybe I teach 10 or 15 a week now. And then I try to film like 4 or 5 videos a week. And then I'm practicing a few hours a day now, which was not always the case. From the time I finished my doctorate till now, there were some times where I was like, no. I mean, if you look at how much rep I've learned in the last 5 years, you'd be like, dang, he's like worked pretty consistently. He's done well, but that's like not really the case. It's been like die hard, like I'm going to learn Rock 3 in 6 months and perform it because I got an orchestra gig. And like that 6 months, like I killed myself to get that ready, learn it all, perform it at a high level, and canceling students all the time, having a less consistent upload schedule. So I was just like, I don't want to give up on any one of those 3 areas. So I have to cut back on certain things, and I have to have a realistic, like I do 2 pro practice videos a month. And even that's a little rigorous because I got to learn the pieces for them. And then I'm doing my own repertoire, and then I'm teaching private students. So I think people look at what I do and they're like, how does he have enough hours in the day? But I try to do it strategically. And it's just been through trial and error. I'm not like a wizard. I don't have every minute of my day written down. I don't like that. Like people that are like big into efficiency are like, I got to have every minute scheduled out. I'm like, I feel really constricted by that. Maybe it's just a psychological issue, but I like to have some flexibility in the schedule that I can have some time to practice. I also try to exercise like 5 times a week. So that has to take priority as well. Like, because if you don't, like, you'll never work out ever. So that's like almost my number 1 priority is to exercise every day. Cause I know if it's like number 2, it'll never get done. So yeah, that's pretty much the balance. And then I like to spend time with my wife and daughter too. So I try to schedule time in for that every day as well. So it's been a learning experience to get somewhat of a balance. I feel like I'm in a pretty good spot now. So
That's really encouraging to know because, sorry, Rachel, because we always see people that are just like juggling a million things, and like, of course, they're not always revealing, even if they're not doing it on purpose. They're not revealing like, oh, I had to cancel all my students for a couple of weeks to get this done, or I had to say no to this one big opportunity to get this done. So it's really encouraging to see like a really realistic approach to just like juggling and moving things around. So I was actually curious about like your teaching philosophy as someone that's been teaching in many different platforms for a long time. Like, how has your teach or what is, I guess, what is the main focus or focuses of your teaching philosophy, and how do you think that's evolved over the years as you've gained all this experience?
I don't really know. To be honest, I think that I want to uh, be well, like I want my students to be really well-rounded. So I'm not just saying, okay, the first year or 2, I'm just teaching you technique and you're not going to really learn too much about artistry. I like to be stimulating that like artistic muscle really early on. Even sometimes at the expense of like going more hardcore into technique, and maybe I'm crippling my students a little that way, but it all works out over time. And I've noticed that students, like, there is no magic teacher. Like you look at teachers like Logan Skelton or like Robert McDonald at Juilliard or Sergei Babayan. It's like they just have good students. Like, how is that possible? Like, it's taken them a long time to get there. They had to teach a lot of crappy students, I'm sure, early on. And like Robert McDonald, I just presented at this summit last week that he was also presenting at. And it was like, he's like, I look good because I have good students. He's like, I attract good students because of the schools that I'm at. And he's also a very, very good teacher, but it's not always that way. And it's not that you have to pay your dues your entire life in order to do that. Sometimes certain opportunities come, or a student wants to study with you that's really talented. So, like when I've had to submit things for the university faculty review stuff, like I look like I've got a pretty good teaching resume, but like most of those awards boil down to just a few of my students, right? It's not every single student in my studios winning international competitions. There's a few that have placed in competitions, and then I teach a lot of people just because it's fun, and they're never going to win a competition, but I still like them and I still learn a lot from teaching them. They learn a lot from taking with me, and it's a good relationship and I enjoy it. So I think the main philosophy is just to make sure that you're helping your students become well-rounded in all aspects of their playing, not just one area, and then just give as much as you can. I like that Neuhaus philosophy of getting rid of your students as quickly as possible by giving them everything you know. Now, I mean, he was teaching Gilels and Richter, so it's like if he's not getting rid of those guys, he's saying something by saying that statement. But it's to give as much as you can. Like I don't like to hold back. I don't like to overflow my students either. I don't like them, teaching them such advanced concepts that they're not going to understand them. You got to teach to the student's level, but I always like to try to bring somewhat of an artistic inspiration to the lesson to get them thinking on a higher plane. I think I don't see that in a lot of teaching. So I've had a lot of students come to me that are like, oh my gosh, my teacher never even talked about using an image in my piece, or they never made me voice things, or they never taught me how to breathe and use rubato at the ends of my phrases. And this is just or they never taught me how to listen. Sometimes we'll just listen to a recording in a lesson and be like, look how he does that. And they'll be like, oh, I never noticed that. I'm glad you showed me. I remember doing that with Susan a lot growing up. It seemed like half the lesson, sometimes we were just listening to Murray Pariah play. And I was like, man, what am I paying what are my parents paying for in this lesson? We're just listening to a recording. I could do this at home. But she was pointing things out, like, listen how he does that. Listen how he does that. And that's a better lesson than her grilling me over a technical exercise any day of the week. Because once your ears can be elevated to a certain point, then your mind and your fingers just follow. Like your fingers will do whatever your mind tells them to do. And when you have blocks, like I have a couple mental blocks with a couple little techniques, it's because something's wrong in my mind. It's not like my fingers are incapable. I've played some of the hardest repertoire out there. So why can't I do this certain skill? It's because there's something wrong in my head. So if I can get my students thinking at a better level, then they kind of fix themselves, to be honest. So
thank you. That was really inspiring to hear. Can we move on? If there are no questions, maybe we can move on to more of your advice or suggestions for us if we want to do online teaching, what equipments you use, and what camera you are using right now.
Sure. Yeah. If you go to kit.co/Josh Wright Piano, there's a whole, that's just like my gear kit that has all links to everything I'm about to say. So like if you're writing this down and you don't catch something, I can tell you. But if you want to see something in person, like that's has all the links in there. Every piece of gear in my studio is in that kit. So yeah, I don't think you need a DSLR for lessons. I use that. That's what I'm using right now, but I don't think you need a fancy camera. I actually think that's the last piece of gear you should acquire as a fancier camera. I would first focus on sound. I just, like, for many years, I just used this, and my wife still uses this. She's like, I don't want to set up all those mics. They're all set up, by the way. She's listening to this right now, so she's probably rolling her eyes, but she's like, yeah, I'm not going to do the fancy setup. But I got really obsessed with like the best possible setup I could find. I tested like 10 mics before I settled on this one. So this is just a Blue Yeti. These are like $100. They've ranged during COVID from $90 to $150, depending on how in demand they were. But you're going to have to spend a lot of money to get much better than that, to be honest. So I think that's a great microphone. Now I'm using 3 mics, 2 AKG 414 microphones. Those are about $900 a piece to $1,000 a piece inside the piano. And then this is a Neumann TLM 103. That's about $1,100. So I'm giving you the prices because I hate when people don't. They like hold back and then it's so surprising. But that way you can get a good sound out of those mics while you still have. And if I'm talking here, you can notice that's a directional microphone. So if I'm teaching a lesson, I'll pull this over just like this. I'll raise this up a little. So I'm like talking right into the microphone. But I can still like, okay, we're going to do a crescendo and then we're going to come down here. It gets a little hard to do. Hang on one sec. It gets a little hard to do those types of demonstrations when you only have one microphone, because the piano is always competing for your voice. But for most and by the way, none of my students have this fancier setup either. So this is just so they can hear me as clearly as possible. And I feel like if I'm charging for lessons and I'm doing this for many years, I just kind of feel responsible to try to give them the best experience possible. So that's what I use for my mics. For the interface, what the mics go into, I use a Zoom F6. The H6 is still a good piece of gear. Like, I'm not going to rag on it, but I didn't like it. Like, the Zoom F6 with 2 AKGs. So the Zoom F6 is, I think, around $600, and the AKGs are about $9 each. You have a professional level recording studio in a backpack with that. And it all fits in a small Pelican case that will fit into any carry-on. It's pretty sweet. Like, you have to carry around your stands to hold the microphones. But, like, I know a guy in LA, or I don't know him. I know of videos online where he is one of the most, like, famous, his name's Mick something, and he is one of the most, like, famous techs around, like, or audio engineers, and he uses AKG 414s with Apollo interfaces, and I have an Apollo interface, but I use the Zoom because it has way more inputs, and I've tested them side by side. I can't hear a difference. If any of you are audio geeks, that has 32-bit float recording, which is so freaking cool. 32-bit float, basically, the issue you always run into when you're recording is you don't want to clip. You don't want to distort your microphone because it ruins your recording. If you clip once, you cannot sell that recording, right? Like, if you're doing a professional album, it's the most amateur mistake. 32-bit float, unless it's like a jet engine, you can't clip that. Like, you're going to blow out your microphone before you blow out the interface. So it's incredible technology. So I would start there. Like, if you want to up your game with lessons, up it with the mics first. The next thing that I would definitely buy, or maybe even, I don't know, maybe these first two are the same, but I would just get a basic A10 Mini. They're $295. I have the A10 Mini Pro because I wanted to record some live streams, and it allows you to simultaneously record a live stream. But it's really stupid because they only put one USB-C port on the back of it. So you have to be live on YouTube, but you can't really see your picture unless you have an external monitor. It's real complex. They just came out with something called the A10 Extreme, and that thing is awesome because it has 2 USB-C outputs. It has 8 inputs in case you wanted like 8 cameras. That'd be insane. But it has macro buttons built in. Like, macro buttons, I bought this little, I don't even know if you're gonna be able to see this, but this is called a Stream Deck. Gamers use this. Like, I'm so great. Like, I always thought video gamers were losers until the pandemic hit, and then I'm like, oh, I'm using all these awesome things because of video gamers. But it just allows you to, like, do things really quickly. Like, okay, there's my wife's logo. There's my logo. That was my, it's not plugged in, but that was my iPad view. This is my side view. And then there's that. So it just allows you, that's all built in on the new ATEMs. But I would just get, if I was just starting out, like if you stole all my equipment and I had to start over, I would just, and I didn't have a lot of money to work with, I would just buy a regular ATEM Mini, $295. That'll give you the option to switch quickly between the side cam or the overhead cam, or build this little feature. And I have a YouTube video about all this, by the way, how to set all this up. If you just search Josh Wright ATEM, ATEM, and then if you want to do the macro thing, you can search Josh Wright Stream Deck. Those just come up right on YouTube. And so I'd probably do that. I can't even tell you how much of a difference having an overhead cam has made for my students, because they're like, oh yeah, I can see what you're doing there really well. Where so like if I'm teaching rotation with arpeggios and I'm like, okay, you're just using semicircle rotation like that, but you're not actually tilting your wrist. Like from the side you can kind of tell that I'm doing it, But when it's overhead, you see my hand angle totally change. And so that's been huge. So I'd probably go with the ATEM, and then you can just hook up your phone. Like right now, that overhead is just an old phone that's giving me that overhead angle, and then I just have the DSLR there. But you could use a second phone for that, and you just plug that into the ATEM, and then you can quickly switch or just build up this little setup, so it's just always on like that. Also, I love using an iPad for lessons because and most people have some sort of tablet these days. I mean, you don't have to get a super fancy iPad, but I like to annotate the scores for my students and then send those to them after the lesson. That makes them really effective. Then after that point, once you've upped your microphone game and your cameras, then you can upgrade, or sorry, not cameras, upgrade it to the ATEM. Then you can get lighting if you want fancier lighting. And just to show you what a difference, just this little tiny microphone here, or this little light, I mean, that makes a pretty significant difference. That light was like, I think like $100. This really bright light, that was like about 400. That's called a Falcon Eyes light. I like that. I also have a $1,000 light over there that I originally bought. It's like a full photography studio light. It's huge. It has a huge dome. And this one right here was like 400, and this one is just as bright. I actually like it more because it gives you more options, like full color temperature adjustment. So that's that. How I place the mics in the piano, I place them about 3 feet apart, and I have them facing downward in cardioid mode. Cardioid is directional mode. So they're both pointing pretty much down at the strings. They're a couple feet apart. And then I pan hard right and hard left within the interface. That gives like a really nice 3-dimensional sound. If I just put them both at center, it's not really, there's no reason to have 2 microphones that way. But if you're panning right and left, it makes it sound like you're actually in the room. And if you listen to my YouTube videos lately versus even when I started putting mics inside the piano was about 8 months ago. And you can hear a huge difference. And when I started using this mic, but I used to always just put a mic right here and just kind of shout into it. And the piano like came through because the piano's so dang loud, but I tried to get it as close to my face as I could. And I tried to think of every way. I tested out shotgun microphones like up here that are pointing at my mouth. They just didn't have the same sound quality. So, I mean, for a pianist's application, you can trust me. I've tested so many different microphones and gone through that trouble. These are the 3 that I like the most. I like the Neumann a little more for my voice. It has less options than the AKGs. The AKGs also sounded great on my voice, but this one has kind of like a warmer, silkier sound. So I ultimately, it's about the same price as an AKG. So that's what I went with there for the third mic. Trying to think if there's anything else. Always use an Ethernet cable. That's really basic advice, but that will help the connection a lot with your online lessons. Like if my student's like, no, I'm going to use Wi-Fi, I was like, okay, we'll meet when you have an Ethernet cable plugged in. Like I'll just end the lesson, right? Because I'm just like, this is so stupid. If you're not willing to buy a $5 cable for your lesson and you're paying many times that for one lesson, it's like, why don't you buy that? It's going to make the lesson better. So I kid around. I'm really not that abrasive, but it's like, I'm like, yeah, you got to get that. So if you have a student starting out, maybe give them a disc and they're really good, like starting out lessons with you. If they're an advanced student, you really can't get by without using, unless they've got really good room acoustics, they might be okay with just an iPad, but they can't get by without having some sort of high quality microphone. So I've even like in extreme situations like discounted lessons so that they can go use the extra money to buy a Yeti so that I could actually hear the details. Because it's really important that I can hear everything clearly. And FaceTime, I never use FaceTime. I like Zoom the best. Some of the Zoom settings that I like to use under the audio settings, I'll just take you guys through those real quick. So I uncheck the box. If you go in your Zoom window and you go under the little arrow next to the mute and then you go to audio settings, that'll bring up the audio. Under the microphone, I uncheck the box that says automatically adjust microphone volume. That's wonderful for voice if you're just talking to someone over Zoom, because if there's background noise, it'll adjust it so it's louder or softer. It's really bad for when you're playing music because you don't want the mic constantly adjusting to louder or softer levels. Under suppress background noise, I'll leave that on low. Under music and professional audio, I check all of those, and that's why I switched to Zoom over Skype, is because of those 4 options right there. Those just made a world of difference. So those are my audio settings. I'm trying to think if there's really anything else that I do. I think that's about it. Does anybody have any questions about the setup? Okay. Yeah, we can move on to whatever else you want.
But yeah, it sounds really good. The microphone does sound really good. And I think all of us, when you were playing earlier and showing us what the piano sound sounded like, all of us were like, I saw Rachel go. So yeah, that it sounds really good. And I think that kit.co, I'll post that link in here again for everyone. That's really useful.
Good.
Someone has a question. Kylie asks, how do you speak while your student is playing on Zoom?
So the nice thing about having a mic right next to your mouth is I'll just say, okay, let's stop right there. And usually my mic is pronounced enough. I've turned up the volume enough on my mic that, and I don't kill them with the piano. So I've turned down the piano mics to a lower level than my voice that I can just say, okay, let's stop and go back. It's actually a nice balance. This is turned up about 13 or 14 dB higher than my piano mics. So a little bit of that might be the microphone itself, but not really. They both have really nice settings in them. So it's not like this is a piece of crap that I have to crank up. It's like they're both about the same quality microphone. And I just turn those ones in the piano because the piano is so much louder than my voice. So I'll just stop. Some people will ring a little bell. Like if you just have just so you're not shouting at your students like stop, and like making yourself hoarse during a lesson. So I would, if you have like 8 hours of teaching to do and you don't want to be shouting and you don't have a mic right next to your mouth, but I'm talking really softly right now. I'm not like shouting or anything. So, and you can hear me just fine. So that's what I'll do. And if the student doesn't hear me, I'll just wait till they get to a softer part of the phrase and then say, okay, let's stop and go back. It usually never takes more than 2 times of saying stop. Usually it's always the first time, but if they happen to not hear me, if they're right in the middle of a big phrase or something, I just am like, okay, let's just stop right there. So, or I'll tell the student beforehand, like, okay, let's try this passage and then stop when you get to bar 8 or whatever, so that they're not just like playing through the rest of their piece. So you can avoid things just by being a little bit more clever as a teacher, or the way you have to explain things. You have to be a better teacher. I did a master class with Pressler when I was at U of M, and he like never left his chair, but it was a great master class. So it just goes to show you that you can speak. If you can be articulate with what you're saying, you can get by over Zoom just fine. Like that was like a lot of people like, isn't it so much harder to not be in person? I'm like, I've been doing this since 2012, so I guess I'm used to it. But no, I don't think it's harder. I've just had to become a better teacher. But I don't think anything is inherently harder because I can't touch my student or write in their music. I'm writing in their music on this end on the iPad, and I've got the iPad hookup if they need to really see something. So tech has really made it, some of these cool tech advancements you guys have seen in this presentation with like the ATEM and stuff has made that difference so small. The one thing you can't get is room acoustics. So if your student has a mic right next to their piano, they may not be projecting enough, and you won't know that as a teacher until you get them in a hall. That's the only real disadvantage that I see with Zoom lessons, but it's not such a disadvantage that like I'm like, these are crap, I'm never teaching these again. I would just be like, let me make sure like once every few months that we meet up and like actually hear how you're projecting if they're getting ready for a competition. But I have a lot of international students that I've never met ever, like that. So one lives in China right now, one lives in Toronto, one like I've got a bunch across the US. So it's not, it just wasn't feasible for me to meet up with them anyway. So when people were so upset that they couldn't see their students, I was like, nothing's changed at all in my studio, right? So this is normal for all of us. So, and my students were like, oh, I'm so happy we know how to do this. Like everyone else is panicking, and which that was kind of cool. So
I actually have a quick question related because I noticed you're not wearing any headphones. Do you ever come into the difficulty with like students' sound like going into your mic and creating feedback, or how do you avoid that?
yeah, there's a couple solutions. If you like wearing headphones, you can get open back headphones. I love these. Like these, you can't take these on a plane because they bleed sound. But actually, the sound stage, meaning like the perception you have of how big your room is amazing. So like classical music has never sounded as good as on these, and these just look like cheap pieces of garbage. The build quality is truly horrible, and the sound quality is truly amazing. These are Grados, so it's just like cheap plastic, a really crummy headband. Like they're light though. I like that how light they are. But my wife bought these as a gift, and I was like, geez, these are like not impressive at all compared to like when people are like Grados are amazing. And then I listened to them and I was like, these are mind blowing. Like it feels like you're in the concert hall. They're so good. So you can open back headphones are nice because then I'm not like if you use closed back or noise canceling headphones, you feel like you're shouting. Like it's hard to tell how loud you're speaking when you have those on. So people use earbuds, but earbuds like don't have the highest quality of sound. A lot of them don't. So it's like, it's kind of a hard mix. So either use open back if you absolutely love headphones. The other easy solution is just tell you, if you're getting feedback, a couple things are wrong. Either the student has their mic way too close to their speakers, and so the speakers are playing back a sound that then loops into the mic, then it loops back through the speakers, so you get that wah, 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 kind of like echo. Or if I'm talking and I can hear myself, even with this really nice setup, sometimes I'll hear myself on my student's end. I'm like, you need to turn your sound down. And they just turn it down a few notches and it goes away. So that's how you fix that. It's not like a big issue. It's just make sure that they, can still hear you, but say turn your volume down a bit, and I'll make sure they can still hear me just fine. But that always fixes it instantly. That was really frustrating for a lot of years. I didn't know how to fix that, and I was like, just turn your volume down. They're like, okay, and it fixed it. So easy fix.
Yeah, that's super helpful. Thank you.
Are there any questions? Wait. Oh yeah. There's a question. I'm wondering if you have any suggestions for the mics that you can put inside of the piano that are cheaper than the ones that you mentioned, since I cannot afford them yet.
Yeah, sure. Really, any pair of microphones within reason. Like if you're getting $30 ones on Amazon, those might be a little too crappy. But any pair of microphones, I think, is going to probably be better within reason than one expensive microphone, because you're getting that true stereo sound. So the AKG 414s, what I have in my piano, are about like $1,000 a piece. You can get the 214s, which are about $300 a piece, I think. And then I think they have even lower models, but that would be a good, you can get a pair for less than one of the nicer ones. You can look at pencil mics. Those are the little ones that are like that big and real small. But I don't like, those are called small diaphragm microphones because they just have a small little capsule in them, versus this is a large diaphragm because it has a bigger capsule. Capsules in large diaphragms are like the size of like a silver dollar or like a 50-cent piece, usually about that size, maybe size of a quarter. Small diaphragms are way smaller. And I just find that for piano, you can get good results. A lot of people would just scoff at what I'm saying, but I don't like small diaphragm as much as large diaphragm. So I'd get 2 large diaphragm mics, and you can, like I said, you have a recording studio in your backpack. It's such a cool feeling, like, oh my gosh. And the nice thing about the Zoom is that it runs off of batteries. So you can plug it in as well. You can use a power supply, but it's truly mobile. So all you need is you just need your microphones and your stands, and then XLR cables, just these cables that plug in to both ends, and you're ready. You're done. And that's so portable. It's great for concerts. And then I'll just film with my iPhone, real low profile. Like if I'm playing a professional concert or something, I always just film with my iPhone. I've brought the DSLR before, and it doesn't really yield much better results than an iPhone these days. If you are using your iPhone and you want to get this image, like if you're going to use your phone for overhead, I like an app. It's like $14, I think. It's called Filmic Pro. It just gives you full control over your camera, and it gives you something called clean HDMI output, meaning that you're not going to see any of your camera settings on the actual output that you're using through your ATEM or whatever it is. So that's nice for Zoom lessons. If you decide to use a phone, make sure to download that app.
We have one more question. What is the most effective way, in your experience, to attract more students?
That's a hard question because you never really know where students are attracted to you from. So if you don't have a big online presence, I would say, cultivating relationships with your current students and then letting them know, hey, this was before I ever posted anything on YouTube. I attracted a full studio as a teenager really quickly because I got a few students, and then I was like, can I come do a free concert for the youth at your church? I did like a little youth church thing, and at the end I was like, it's $10 a lesson. I'll come to your house. And I had a full studio that night. It was great. And that way I didn't have to work with my dad. He's a stonemason. I hated that. He does beautiful work, but it was just grunt work. I didn't like it. He's like an artist. When you're laying the stone, it's great. But when you're like mixing the mud and stuff, it's horrible. So so I started a little lower than most teachers were, but I was only 16 years old. I didn't care. And I mean, you're still making $20 an hour as a 16-year-old. I was like, this is great. And then you up it to 30 and then 40. And it was just like, this is incredible. So, so I would cultivate those relationships, doing outreach events. Like I was just saying, like the church thing, you could play at elementary schools. You could do whatever you want. You could give free master classes for other teachers and ask them if they need you to tutor any of their other students. I know that like MTNA is a great resource for that. You can contact other teachers and say, and don't just cold call them and say, hey, if you have extra students, can you send them my way? Because I'm not going to send a teacher I don't know how they teach a student. Even if I don't know that student, I'm still not going to send it to them. But if you send them like something really professional, like here's a recording of me teaching a recent master class at Indiana University. I'm building my studio. I would be so grateful if you could send me some referrals, even if you just need a practice coach for your student. My rates are affordable. I'm happy to, accommodate that student. Just make it really easy for them, add value for them. And that seems to be the best way I've found, just adding value. That's why I get students all the time from YouTube. And I'm at a point now where I can't really teach any more students. I say no to like 99% of requests of students because the demand is so high, because I've added value that they're like, oh, I like the way he taught that, or he changed the way I play, so I want to study with him. Now that's what I'm saying with creating value. Try to help students or help people in a way that adds value so that then they want more of that. That's, I think, the best way to really do anything, is not to try to do a sales pitch, but to really just show them how much value you can add to their life.
That's really helpful, I think. I think we can end the session now unless there's any other questions. I know Joshua kind of like went over the time that we asked you for. I'm sorry about that. So thanks for being here.
That's okay. Yeah.
Any other questions? Going once, going twice. Okay. I guess we can let everyone go and enjoy their Friday evenings. Thank you so much, Josh, for being here and for sharing so openly. That was really helpful and really inspiring. So, and
No
also,
problem.
yeah, we all I think are very inspired by what you're doing with your YouTube channel and your online presence, because I remember you were, I think, maybe one of the first classical pianists I found on YouTube. And so I was just like, oh, wow, actually, classical musicians can be in this technological space in a useful and valuable way. So, yeah, thank you for
Thank
being
you.
here and sharing with us.
Yeah, you're welcome. No problem.
And thank you, Rachel, for setting this up using those
No,
connections.
yeah. Yeah, a lot of my students actually watch your videos and they would come to lessons and be like, "Oh, by the way, do you know who Josh Wright is? Like, I'm learning this piece and I went on YouTube and I saw some tricks that he mentioned."
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
It's great to hear. Okay, well, thank you guys so
Okay.
much.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Have a wonderful evening. Thanks for being here. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.